Perhaps all of us at some point have placed our trust in the wrong hands. You offer your loyalty, expose the most fragile parts of your soul, believing you're in a space of mutual respect and safety. Then, without warning, you find a blade in your back, not steel, but indifference, a lie, or a nod of agreement that soon turns to betrayal, shattering the trust you once guarded. Betrayal in relationships wounds more than the heart. It reshapes our perception of the world. And in the spirit of Stoicism, not all wounds should be healed with forgiveness, not because we burn with anger, but because dignity is not a currency to be bartered. Betrayal on infidelity, when they choose someone else over you. In the realm of relationships, especially those rooted in love, friendship, or family, infidelity is often excused as an emotional mistake. Many claim they lost control of their feelings, succumbed to a moment of weakness, or that things escalated too quickly to stop. Yet Stoic thought rejects this line of reasoning. Stoicism sees humans as rational beings, capable of self-governance and making choices guided by reason, not just by impulsive emotions. Infidelity, regardless of how it manifests, an affair, an act of betrayal, or choosing someone else over you, is the product of deliberate decisions, not unconscious reactions. Before the final act of betrayal occurs, there are often signs: avoidance, secrecy, fabricated excuses, even the cultivation of a parallel emotional connection. Each of these is a conscious step. Each move toward disloyalty is not a fleeting emotion, but a signal of a misaligned personal value system. Stoicism makes a clear distinction between fleeting emotion and deliberate action. One might momentarily feel attracted to someone else. This lies outside full control, but choosing to nurture that feeling, to conceal it, and ultimately act upon it in defiance of a commitment. This is, in a relationship, loyalty does not demand the denial of emotion. It requires the disciplined handling of it. The loyal person is not one who never feels tempted, but one who knows how to separate thoughts from actions. To label infidelity as an accident may relieve the wrongdoer of moral responsibility, but it undermines the very value of trust. Stoicism reminds us that actions define us more than words ever could. When someone chooses betrayal, they don't merely break the relationship. They expose the moral architecture within themselves. In decisive moments, they chose personal gratification over honoring a shared promise. Therefore, infidelity must be recognized for what it truly is, not the product of weakness, but the outcome of a conscious sequence of choices. Clarifying this is not about condemnation, but about acknowledging that every betrayal is a moral decision, and every decision carries responsibility. It cannot be blamed on circumstance, emotion, or timing. Every human relationship, whether romantic, platonic, or familial, is built on a core value system, with ethics at its center. When two people commit to one another, they are not merely sharing time and emotion. They are agreeing implicitly to a shared code of living: respect, honesty, accountability, and above all, loyalty. These values form the ethical bedrock of the bond. When loyalty is broken, that entire value system begins to collapse, taking with it trust and the psychological safety that once held the relationship together. Infidelity is a direct violation of that moral foundation. When someone prioritizes self-interest over a shared commitment, they alter the relationship's ethical structure from within. The act doesn't just wound the other, it erodes trust, the essential glue for any lasting bond. Once broken, trust gives way to suspicion. The betrayed begins to question everything. Were those past words ever true? Was the care ever genuine? What else is still being hidden? Seen this way, infidelity is not merely a personal failing. It is structural sabotage. It dismantles the sense of safety where one once felt respected and secure. When moral foundations collapse, other virtues begin to fall. Empathy turns to doubt. Kindness becomes guardedness, and once deep affection transforms into emotional burden. The capacity to recover after an act of infidelity is remarkably low, not because forgiveness is beyond us, but because betrayal fractures the very structure of the relationship. What is damaged is not merely emotional connection, but the entire moral framework that once held two people together. Once those principles are violated, it becomes exceedingly difficult to rebuild anything lasting on a broken foundation. In relationships, forgiveness is often seen as a noble act, an expression of compassion and generosity. However, when forgiveness is extended repeatedly for the same transgression, especially for infidelity, it gradually shifts from a virtue to a surrender of one's own boundaries. If betrayal recurs after being forgiven, the fault no longer lies solely with the betrayer, but also becomes a reflection of the injured party's failure to draw clear lines for self-preservation. In the moral architecture of a relationship, loyalty cannot endure without consequences for betrayal. One only learns the true value of trust when its violation results in tangible outcomes. If infidelity carries no end, no withdrawal, no redefined limits, the offender sees no compelling reason to change. They may repeat the offense, knowing the consequence, if any, is fleeting and easily erased with apologies or hollow promises. Persistent forgiveness, in the face of recurring betrayal, leads to a subtle yet dangerous erosion. The slow decay of self-respect. The one who continues to forgive begins to doubt their worth, wondering if their expectations are too high, or if they even deserve a more honest relationship. This uncertainty clouds their moral clarity, opening the door to tolerating what should never be tolerated. From a Stoic standpoint, forgiving repeated infidelity is no longer kindness. It becomes a sign of lost control over the boundary between compassion and self-harm. When forgiveness is used to mask fear of loneliness or emotional dependence, it ceases to serve a moral purpose and instead enables the betrayal to continue unchallenged. Thus, forgiveness cannot be unconditional in every circumstance, especially in cases of infidelity. If there is no genuine transformation in the one who betrayed, then continued forgiveness becomes a betrayal of one's own need to be respected and treated justly. When confronted with betrayal, the initial human response is often intense emotion, anger, blame, deep hurt, even a desire for revenge. These are natural reactions, the result of broken trust and violated psychological safety. But if hatred is the only response, one surrenders their mental and emotional sovereignty to the very person who caused the pain. In Stoic thought, such surrender must be avoided. Stoicism guides us toward preserving inner peace even amidst profound wounds. When someone chooses infidelity, they have already stepped outside the shared moral framework of the relationship. The appropriate response then is not retaliation, but a clear and decisive end. Ending the relationship is not an act of vengeance. It is a way of safeguarding dignity and reclaiming self-governance. Hatred often carries lasting consequences that damage both the mind and the body. In contrast, a composed ending preserves one's control. Choosing not to react with rage is not a sign of weakness or tacit acceptance of wrongdoing. It is the expression of higher awareness that the betrayer no longer deserves your energy, attention, or presence. A decisive response, free of bitterness, carries moral weight. It delivers a sealant message. Loyalty is not something that can be trampled without consequence. Walking away instead of retaliating strengthens personal values and reaffirms the moral standards one upholds in relationship. Ending a relationship that has lost its foundation of trust is not failure. It is an act of self-preservation. It allows one to return to a state of autonomy, to withdraw energy from what is unworthy, and to redirect focus toward rebuilding life with healthier bonds. A person's standards are not proven by what they claim, but by how they respond to adversity, especially betrayal. In ordinary times, one may appear virtuous or tolerant as part of social behavior, but in moments of loss, pain, and broken trust, such as facing infidelity, their true principles come into sharp relief. From a moral and philosophical standpoint, betrayal is a direct challenge to personal boundaries and the values one sets for oneself. Reactions to it divide people into two distinct groups: those who lower their standards to preserve connection, and those who hold firm to principle, even at the cost of separation. This is when moral ideals cease to be abstract and become actionable truths. A healthy relationship can only exist where both parties share a common value system, with loyalty at its core. When one person violates that core, the event becomes a mirror, not only reflecting the character of the betrayer, but revealing the moral depth and threshold of the one who was wronged. If the betrayed chooses to overlook it, to continue without clearly reestablishing standards, it may indicate that their values are being compromised by emotion or dependency. Maintaining moral standards in the face of betrayal requires rigorous mental discipline. It does not stem from coldness or rigidity, but from clarity that loyalty is not negotiable. A person with firm ethical footing understands that holding on to a relationship stripped of its integrity is not only futile, it is a form of self-betrayal. Thus, infidelity is not merely an event between two people. It is a moment of reckoning. It reveals with sobering precision how deeply one is committed to their own code. The response to betrayal is the clearest, most silent declaration of the standards by which one chooses to live. Betrayal. 2. Deception. When the truth is deliberately distorted. In relationships, many tend to downplay the gravity of lies by calling them accidental, a moment of weakness, or thoughtless. Yet from a moral, and especially Stoic perspective, lying is never a spontaneous act. It is the result of conscious choice, where the liar weighs truth against concealment, personal gain against transparency. A lie does not emerge in a vacuum. It requires a series of preparatory acts: selecting the timing, crafting the words, anticipating the listener's reaction, and constructing a plausible alternative to reality. Each part of this sequence signals intention. A lie cannot be uttered without first concluding that telling the truth is personally disadvantageous, and in that very decision, choosing self-interest over respect, betrayal begins. The danger of lying lies in this. It often starts small, as a means of avoiding discomfort, but paves the way for greater deception. Once a person succeeds in hiding the truth, they are more likely to repeat the behavior to maintain control. Each subsequent lie becomes more refined, forming a subtle web of fabrication that becomes increasingly difficult to unravel. Moreover, lying implies something deeper. The liar has already judged the other person as someone who can be manipulated. They assume the truth will go undetected, or if discovered, will be forgiven. This reveals not only the premeditated nature of the lie, but also how the liar views the other's role in the relationship, not as an equal deserving respect, but as someone to be controlled through misinformation. Thus, even when cushioned with uses, a lie cannot be considered accidental. It is always the result of calculation, choice, and trade-off. In every case, concealing the truth constitutes betrayal. for it violates the principle of honesty, the foundation upon which lasting trust is built. Unlike more visible acts of betrayal, infidelity, or openly broken promises, deception operates in silence. It leaves no physical trace, no sound, yet its damage to trust runs deeper and lasts longer. Lying corrodes the moral core from within, not through sudden blows, but through a kisesu, steady fracturing. When someone chooses to lie, they are not merely hiding facts. They are shaping how the other person understands reality, thereby altering how that person reacts to their world. The betrayed may not sense the lie at first, but over time, in words, behavior, and circumstances begin to raise doubt. This doubt doesn't arise from a single moment, but gradually accumulates through interactions, as a vague feeling that something's off, or that everything adds up, but feels untrue. It is this silence that makes deception one of the most dangerous threats to trust. The deceived has no clear sign to respond to, leaving them suspended in uncertainty, torn between belief and suspicion. During this time, they may continue to invest emotionally, make sacrifices, or defend the relationship, unaware that its foundation is quietly eroding beneath them. One distinct feature of deception is that it does not shatter trust all at once. It erodes it bit by bit. And once the truth emerges, the reaction is not merely disappointment from being lied to, but a profound sense of disorientation. How long have I been living in falsehood without knowing how much of this relationship was ever real? What else is still being kept from me? The lasting harm of deception lies not only in the loss of trust toward one person, but in the diminished capacity to trust others in the future. It leaves psychological scars, making a person more guarded, more skeptical, and less open, not just toward the liar, but toward every relationship that follows. Lying is not merely the act of concealing truth. At its core, it is the deliberate restructuring of reality in favor of the liar, while reshaping how the deceived sees, thinks, and acts. In relationships, this becomes especially severe, because the betrayed is not only robbed of trust, but also of the right to accurate information essential to making choices for their own life. When someone lies, they are not simply misinforming. They are replacing objective reality with a crafted narrative. This narrative is constructed to steer the listener's attention in a specific direction, causing them to trust, respond, and feel based on something that is not real. Over time, the deceived begins interacting with a manipulated version of reality, where their emotions, decisions, and expectations are guided by what never truly existed. The danger lies in this. The listener has no idea they are living within a distorted reality. They make decisions based on false premises. They offer trust, make sacrifices, or even alter their life path for things they believe to be true. They might defend someone or blame themselves, thinking they were not good enough, not understanding enough, when in truth, reality had already been rewritten. This is a subtle form of manipulation, one that damages not only the relationship, but the individual's very ability to reason clearly. Manipulation through deceit can persist and escalate. One lie often demands others to cover it, to maintain the illusion's coherence. The liar, seeking to retain control, continues to reshape reality for their own benefit, constructing an ecosystem of falsehood. The more the other person trusts, the deeper they are pulled into that web, unaware of its existence. When the truth finally comes to light, the manipulated person does not simply feel betrayed. They are stripped of confidence in their own judgment. They begin to question everything they once believed, and are forced to confront a reality that stands in stark contrast to the one they had lived in. In any healthy relationship, personal boundaries serve as both moral and psychological safeguards, protecting one's values, emotions, and inner peace. These boundaries may not always be spoken aloud, but they are expressed through expectations and limits placed on what behaviors are deemed acceptable from others. When someone lies and is forgiven, it can be viewed as a chance to make amends. But if the lie is repeated and still forgiven, the issue is no longer just with the liar. It lies in the disintegration of those protective boundaries. A lie is not only a violation of trust, it is also a test of the affected person's boundaries. When there are no clear consequences, the liar may quietly assume that their actions will be overlooked or tolerated in the future. The repetition of a deception after forgiveness reveals that the initial moral warning was not strong enough to reestablish boundaries. And when those boundaries are ignored or breached, the relationship enters an imbalance where one continues to transgress and the other slowly loses the ability to protect themselves. In this context, forgiveness is no longer an act of compassion. It becomes a silent permission, where the deceived begins to shrink their own boundaries just to keep the relationship in peace. This may stem from fear of loss, emotional dependency, or hope that the other will change. However, over time, repeated deception not only corrodes trust, but also weakens one's sense of self-worth. The affected person may begin to doubt their instincts, hesitate to ask questions, or come to accept dishonesty as an inevitable part of the relationship. Psychologically, staying in a relationship where lies are continuously forgiven can lead to a gradual erosion of self. The one enduring this behavior can no longer clearly distinguish between forgiveness and avoidance, between patience and needless sacrifice. When boundaries are violated too many times without being restored, the relationship no longer functions as mutual. It becomes a form of systematic manipulation. In any relationship, respect is not merely expressed through polite words, courteous behavior, or visible care. At a deeper level, respect means acknowledging the other person's right to the truth, to live in transparency, and to make decisions based on full information. When someone chooses to lie, they are not merely withholding information. They are declaring implicitly that the other person is not important enough to be told the truth. This is one of the most fundamental and blatant forms of disrespect. Lies diminish the worth of the person deceived, for they strip away that person's right to choose. When someone is fed false information, they cannot make sound decisions, respond appropriately, or protect themselves from hidden consequences. In such cases, the liar is not just manipulating facts. They are dictating another's behavior through dishonesty. To disregard someone's right to the truth is to deny their cognitive autonomy and capacity for judgment. Furthermore, deception breaks the basic trust that any relationship, whether romantic, platonic, or professional, requires to be built on honesty and fairness. When truth is distorted, the relationship loses its equality. One party assumes the role of truth keeper, while the other becomes the directed subject. The relationship no longer exists in mutual respect, but shifts toward imbalance and control. A person who lies repeatedly reveals their disregard for the consequences their actions have on others. It exposes an indifference to the emotions, wounds, and moral boundaries of the one they deceive. In that context, apologies or expressions of regret carry little weight, as the initial act already reflects a fundamental lack of respect. In short, deception is far from socially harmless. On the contrary, it is the clearest manifestation of disregard for another's value and rights, and it dismantles the very principles required to sustain a healthy and equal relationship. Betrayal 3. Emotional manipulation. When intimacy becomes a weapon. Every intimate relationship is built on the foundation of shared vulnerability. When someone opens up about past wounds, hidden fears, or insecurities they cannot voice elsewhere. It is a sign of trust. They believe that being seen completely will lead to deeper empathy and safety in the relationship. Yet emotional manipulation does not begin with coldness or distance. It begins with that very intimacy. The manipulator does not need to dig for understanding. It has been freely given through connection. They know what wounds the other when they are most fragile, and how they tend to react in conflict. Instead of using this insight to nurture the bond, they exploit it to gain control. This behavior is rarely overt at first. It unfolds gradually in minor interactions with increasing frequency. A common example is when the manipulator deliberately brings up a painful past event, one they know caused deep suffering, to soften the other's resolve, induce guilt, or make them abandon personal boundaries. Sensitive truths once shared in trust are repurposed as moral weapons, deployed at just the right moment to silence or disarm. This unfolds within the context of closeness, making it difficult for the manipulated to distinguish genuine care from calculated control. Furthermore, emotional manipulators often avoid direct confrontation. They do not issue commands or threats, but apply pressure through emotion, disappointment, withdrawal. Vague phrases like, "You're not who you used to be," or "You make me feel like I'm not enough." These comments are not accusations, yet they plant guilt, nudging the other to change behavior for approval, even when no wrong has been done. By using understanding to dominate rather than support, emotional manipulators distort the purpose of intimacy. The relationship is no longer a place of healing or growth. It becomes a realm of quiet coercion, where trust is converted into a tool for power and control. In common perception, those who cause harm are imagined as loud, angry, or visibly aggressive. But emotional manipulation often does not appear in such direct forms. Instead, it operates subtly, through minor gestures, soft-spoken remarks, or seemingly harmless phrases that carry heavy psychological weight. Because of this disguise, many do not realize they are being manipulated until the consequences have already taken root. One common tactic is the strategic use of silence. When one partner is displeased or does not get their way, they withhold communication, creating distance rather than engaging in dialogue. This silence is not a pause for reflection. It is a pressure tactic. The other person, uncertain of the cause, becomes anxious, guilty, and begins adjusting their behavior to restore closeness, without even knowing what they did wrong. Repeated over time, this creates a relationship in which one side is always guessing, always retreating before the other speaks. Another form of manipulation involves dismissing emotions or blurring the boundaries of reality. Phrases like, "You're overthinking," "I was just young," or "You're being too sensitive," cause the listener to doubt their own emotional responses. Gradually, they begin to self-censor, no longer sharing sadness, hurt, or frustration, for fear of being labeled dramatic. In that moment, the manipulator has succeeded. They now control the other's emotional space without ever issuing a single command. Subtle behaviors such as comparisons, mild criticisms, or repeated references to past mistakes are also forms of emotional manipulation. They may not cause immediate harm, but over time, they erode self-trust, foster dependence on the manipulator's judgments, and gradually strip away one's emotional autonomy and sense of agency. From these seemingly minor gestures, emotional manipulation builds a silent system of psychological control. Without shouting or coercion, the manipulator influences behavior by generating discomfort when their will is not followed. This lack of clarity and directness makes the manipulation harder to detect and easier to prolong without resistance. In close relationships, emotional connection is often seen as the foundation for mutual understanding and bonding. However, in some cases, emotion is not denied but weaponized. The manipulator does not have to reject love or care. They often use those very sentiments to justify their behavior or to make the other feel responsible for preserving the relationship, even when it has become unhealthy. A common example is when the manipulator expresses intense affection after causing harm. They may say, "I did this because I love you," or "I acted that way out of fear of losing you," or "You don't understand how much I need you." These statements don't negate affection, but use it as justification for harmful behavior. Emotion becomes a tool of psychological pressure, making the other person feel obliged to tolerate, forgive, or change for the sake of keeping the relationship intact. This often goes hand in hand with inducing guilt when boundaries are asserted. Phrases like, "You've changed," "I'm no longer your priority," or "I'm the only one who truly loves you," make the manipulated feel that protecting themselves is somehow selfish. In time, they begin to give up the right to set limits, avoid making reasonable requests, and become easier to control, all under the name of love. What's notable is that the manipulator may maintain a warm, gentle, and even attentive exterior. This makes it even harder for the other person to recognize the control they're under. They confuse genuine care with emotional exploitation. The feeling of love becomes entangled with guilt, fear of loss, and a compulsive need to please, creating a psychological cycle in which the manipulated always feels guilty for seeking fairness. When love becomes a tool of control, the relationship is no longer a bond of mutual respect. It becomes a one-sided attachment. The manipulator may still speak words of affection, but their actions show they value control more than respect, and that is a clear sign of emotional exploitation, not authentic companionship. In most relationships, forgiveness is seen as a constructive step, an act of empathy, compassion, and a desire to mend what was broken. However, in relationships marked by emotional manipulation, forgiveness often does not lead to improvement. It becomes a deliberate part of a recurring cycle of control. Forgiveness, without a corresponding change in behavior from the one causing harm, does not lead to healing. It sustains the imbalance of power within the relationship. Emotional manipulators often exploit the compassion and empathy of their partners after causing harm, whether through insults, avoidance, control, or guilt. They may return with sincere apologies, short-term atonement, or promises to change. These gestures make the other feel loved again and stir hope that this time will be the last. However, in many cases, the change does not stem from moral awareness, but is simply part of a strategy to keep the person from leaving. When the manipulated partner forgives without re-establishing clear boundaries, it not only allows the manipulation to continue, but also weakens their own capacity for self-protection. Each act of forgiveness, without a new limit, is a step back from preserving dignity and inner sovereignty. The person enduring this may begin to confuse compassion with self-doubt, leading them to blame themselves instead of recognizing the root of the harm. This cycle often repeats with increasing speed and intensity. After each round of hurt, apology, forgiveness, repetition, the manipulated partner falls deeper into emotional dependence, believing that patience alone can change everything. Yet in reality, forgiving unconditionally without behavioral change only reinforces the manipulator's belief that they can continue acting without real consequences. Thus, in a manipulative relationship, forgiveness is no longer simply a moral act. It becomes a decisive turning point, that determines whether the relationship will break free from the cycle or spiral further into imbalance and emotional control. One of the most damaging consequences of emotional manipulation lies not in external conflict, but in the silent erosion of a person's understanding of themselves. Within a manipulative relationship, individuals gradually lose their ability to define who they are, what they value, and what boundaries are necessary for self-preservation. This is not an immediate collapse, but a slow process shaped by misdirection, denial, and emotional distortion. Manipulators often use techniques like gaslighting, causing the other to doubt their memory, perception, and emotions. When feelings such as hurt, disappointment, or suspicion are dismissed as too sensitive, imagined, or irrational, the affected person begins to question the validity of their own emotions. They slowly stop trusting their internal compass and start conforming their thinking to the manipulator's reasoning. This gradually weakens their ability to distinguish right from wrong, increasing reliance on the manipulator for guidance. This dependency extends beyond emotion. It infiltrates decision-making. The manipulated often hesitate over personal choices, feel the need to seek permission, avoid disapproval, or suppress desires, even in minor matters. They lose confidence in their ability to decide for themselves, developing a habit of evading responsibility and surrendering control of their life. The ability to define oneself, knowing who you are, what you want, and what you will not accept, is the cornerstone of autonomy and psychological stability. When that is manipulated, a person becomes more vulnerable, more easily influenced, and less able to maintain healthy boundaries in other relationships. They may alter behaviors, beliefs, and even their identity simply to maintain a temporary peace in the current relationship. Therefore, the impact of emotional manipulation extends far beyond interpersonal conflict. It directly undermines cognitive structure and independent choice, two essential foundations for preserving dignity and fostering personal growth. In any relationship, we cannot control whether someone betrays us, lies to us, or manipulates our emotions, but we always have control over how we respond. That is the core lesson I've learned from Stoicism, that true freedom begins within. No one can truly harm you unless you allow it to happen a second time. In daily life, I've learned to take a step back before reacting. Instead of getting swept up in anger, hurt, or trying to explain myself to someone who no longer respects me, I focus on asking, what is this person's behavior revealing to me? And more importantly, will I respond as a rational being or let emotion take the lead? Setting clear boundaries is essential. I no longer confuse forgiveness with allowing someone to remain in my life. Forgiveness may be a way to free myself, but it does not mean I must tolerate repeated violations of fundamental principles. Stoicism does not teach us to be numb. It teaches us to be awake. Being betrayed does not diminish our worth. On the contrary, it is a chance to redefine what is non-negotiable: loyalty, honesty, and the right to be treated with respect. From there, we not only live with greater resilience, but also cultivate healthier relationships built on reason, not fear of loss. If this content spoke to something within you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future episodes. The journey to inner strength is not an easy one, but we don't have to walk it alone. There are things we must forgive in order to grow, and there are people we must let go of in order to be ourselves. See you in the next video.